Okay, hello everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Really excited for what we're about to launch today. Welcoming each and every one of you today to the Software Analyst Podcast. This is going to be a first of its kind with the Software Analyst, where this is an educational series where we dive into the intersection of cybersecurity, innovation, AI, and a lot of the most pressing themes and trends today within cybersecurity. I'm going to be your host, Francis Odom, today, where we're going to be exploring one of the most critical layers of the modern enterprise stack today, which is identity, one of the core pillars today. And I am extremely excited to be joined by my guest today, who I'm going to be introducing you in a moment. But before I go into that, I'll just maybe introduce the software analyst for some of you who might not be aware of what we do. We're an independent analyst, research, and advisory firm, primarily focused on four major verticals in cybersecurity, one of them being identity we're going to be uncovering today, but we also cover cloud and application security. We cover security operations, as well as data security and AI security. And across each of those areas, we track a lot of the emerging themes and trends, working alongside CISOs, practitioners, as well as evaluating all of the emerging vendors. And we present all of our findings and research to our audience of about 70,000 of you, many who read and engage with our work on a occasion. So for today's episode, we're diving into one of the biggest themes and one of the biggest conversations today. Once again, as I said, identity security. And I'm extremely excited with the guests that we're having today. They're topmost professionals, extremely knowledgeable, extremely bright people, and just wonderful, kind human beings that I've had the chance to meet over the years. And so today I'm joined with two incredible minds from Okta, our Jack Hirsch, who is the Vice President of Product, Identity Governance, and Platform at Okta, as well as joined by Julia Oberupman, a leader in a senior director of corporate strategy at Okta, with a long-term platform evolution. And so with both of them, I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a moment here, but we're going to be exploring today key problems in identity security, emerging solutions around this, including conversations around where AI fits into that whole ecosystem. We're going to uncover platforms and best of breed solutions today and finish up our conversation diving into what we think is the future of identity security. So without further ado, maybe Jack and Julia, would you just maybe introduce yourselves to our audience today?
Thanks for having me, Francis. My name is Jack Hirsch, VP of Product here at Okta. Been here for about 4.5 years. Before that, I was at Box, also leading platform product management there. Came from the startup space, actually working on enterprise search AI product before that, and then led product and engineering for a company from way back when that you might remember called Evernote. Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Francis.
Welcome. And Julia.
Julia Oberupman. I'm a director on our corporate strategy team. Very excited, Francis, to have the opportunity to speak with you. Always enjoy the conversations, and particularly with one of my favorite people at Okta, Jack Hirsch. We collaborate a lot. I've been in Okta for about 3.5 years. Prior to that, like Jack, started my career in the startup field, then went over to the dark side in consulting, strategy consulting, and working in M&A. As well. And I'm very excited to be at Okta and help shape our long-term growth strategy, what kinds of new markets we enter, and also contribute to the evolution of our platform, very much in close collaboration with Jack.
Amazing. Both of you are almost some of the best minds, I believe, at Okta.
Almost.
Yes. You guys are wonderful people. I could testify. Anyone could let me know. You guys are amazing. So let's uncover today. I mean, look, Okta. You guys are one of the largest cybersecurity companies, not even within identity, but just one of the largest cybersecurity companies globally. One of the most well-used products. Maybe just to level playing the field for our audience who might not be as familiar or with the latest on Okta. Maybe Jack, do you want to just give us a high level of what Okta and your broad platform, and then we'll dive right into our discussion questions.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, Okta, our vision is to free everyone to safely use any technology. And so identity historically has been, in an IT context, thought of as like an IT enabler to enable things like single sign-on in a workplace, right? But today, as you alluded to, it's so much more than that, right? Identity is the first touch point for an end user who wants to buy a cup of coffee, right? And sign in and use loyalty points. It's the first time a new employee that onboards into your company, what their first physical touch point in that sort of employee experience is. And then, it's obviously identity is a key pillar of security, if not the foundation of modern security. And so if you're, a security operator or an IT admin and you are, going threat hunting, identity is fundamentally the glue that brings all of your technology stack together. And so I think we've ridden a couple of really amazing waves at Okta, right? First, the move to the cloud over the past, 10 to 20 years. And then recently the explosion of remote and distributed work. That has led us to the state we are today, where there's no more security perimeter in a modern enterprise, right? Identity is the perimeter. And so now fundamentally, identity is key to the security stack. And we believe that you can't get security right unless you get identity right. So that's a little bit about Okta. I don't know, Julie, anything to add?
I mean, I think you nailed that, but I will just say that one of the other things that we see as we engage with customers and partners and other companies across the ecosystem, cloud service providers and the like, is that large enterprises are really being forced to shift from this more reactive model to a more proactive model, intelligence-driven decision-making. And that, what authentication has recently been kind of is now relatively commoditized. And there's this more and more of a focus on contextual continuous authorization that drives really the necessary need for orchestration, policy, centralized policy and orchestration across access to apps.
Absolutely. You hit the hill in there, and I think you already started to dive into some of the key challenges, enterprises are facing today, which this is our first key points around discussing the problems, the pain points today that we see in identity. Identity is there's no shortage of things happening, especially knowing identity is really the glue that holds the enterprise together. So maybe Jack, do you want to maybe just talk about, what are some of the biggest challenges that you also see from your vantage point as well?
Yeah, I think, working in the security space, not for the faint of heart. If you're not a security professional, it's kind of terrifying what you learn about the state of the world on the internet. Today, the vast majority of breaches stem from some form of credential or identity abuse, right? So those are stolen session cookies, tokens, and then threat actors will move laterally through organizational IT environments, basically wreaking havoc, exfiltrating data, doing all sorts of bad things, right? And so I think that's just sort of one mega trend that we see ourselves in right now. And I think it sort of creates the need for an identity-centric security story. So I think that's one huge challenge. I think there's another challenge in terms of like the fragmentation of the identity space. So if you look at where we were 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago, we had, your access management stack, right? Okta was like the SSO provider, and then you'd have like a privileged access solution, and then you'd have an identity governance solution. That fragmentation meant that costs were higher for organizations that wanted to adopt these tools to secure themselves. And then security outcomes are worse because customers would have to stitch those things together. Organizations had to stitch them together, and that would create, you need subject matter expertise in all of those disparate disciplines. So like that fragmentation has been a huge challenge. I think so. That's probably two. And then the third one, which is really, really, I don't know, it's sort of like combination of exciting and Wild West, is what, non-human identity. And I think a sort of derivative subset of that, which is AI agents. And so organizations are trying to find that line between enabling, their enabling their people inside the organization to take advantage of this massive technological leap that we're all, witnessing before our very eyes. And then also falling victim to like over provisioning those agents that are now doing like random things, right? They're non-deterministic entities, and you're giving, we can't treat them like, give them sort of super admin access to all of the keys to the kingdom to let them do whatever they want when they're not, when they're doing things in a non-deterministic way. So I'd say those are probably the biggest trends, right? Like identity is sort of core to security, that fragmentation, and then the explosion of identity types now with non-human identity and AI agents. Those are probably the biggest challenges we're hearing out in the industry.
Julia, is there anything else you would add to that? I mean, earlier on you talked about also, I think, Jack, those are all amazing points. And I think as our conversation unfolds today, I think we're going to unpack some of those components to this. But Julia, maybe you had mentioned this move from reactive to more of a proactive stance. Is there any other context you wanted to maybe add to some of the points Jack mentioned?
Yeah, I would just add a little bit color and depth to that point, in that I've had the good fortune of being able to speak to a number of our customers in very large enterprise organizations in depth recently, and also attending a number of CISO forums. I was at one this week with some very large companies who are basically mission critical infrastructure for the economy, for the US economy. And what I hear over and over is this point of, we have these large IT landscapes. We have a lot of technology that wasn't designed to all talk together. And so there really needs to be much more interoperability, the ability to ingest signals across apps, particularly when you're dealing with large enterprises who are increasingly dealing with nation state threat actors, who are able to come in, to Jack's point, steal credentials, get into the infrastructure, and being able to move laterally. How then are you able to detect that, lock them out, and remove their access, or also identify anomalous behavior? And so now, with the explosion of AI, not only non-human identities but also agents, what I hear over and over across customers from the pharmaceutical industry, from the media industry, and also from the financial services agency industry is, wow, what if you have an AI agent now that is able to access a contingent worker's calendar, access our travel portal, look up their, loyalty program in a hotel chain or a flight, book travel through our procurement systems? How do you track who did what when, and how is that authorized? And that is very scary, particularly for regulated industries. And I see this common thread across large enterprises, that contingent workers are a very significant risk factor. And not just because you see on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, North Korea coming in and posing, getting jobs with server farms and bypassing and then generating revenue for their countries, but yeah, the auditability of who's doing what when is becoming very material for a lot of companies across a lot of industries. And I think that's an opportunity where having better identity can be a huge value add for improving security postures.
Yeah, absolutely. Jack, were you going to add something there, or was this okay? Yeah, because honestly, those are all auditability was already a challenge even before we had AI and agents, and now we're still in the early, we're only scratching the surface. And to think about the amounts of agents each enterprise worker will have, just raises just the attack surface significantly, especially from that identity landscape. So maybe I mean, there's no shortage of problems and challenges today and risk. Let's talk about some solutions. Let's talk about what are some solutions using the context of this identity explosion, fragmentation, how AI is really expanding the surface, the issues of contingent worker. What are some solutions that you all think that identity leaders should ideally be looking at on the market today to help solve their problem? Maybe Jack, I'll start with you in terms of how do we go about solving one of these problems. You could pick one of the key themes you talked about and how we could go about solving them.
Yeah, let's talk about that fragmentation, because I think that is actually, independent of the rise of AI agents and the proliferation of sort of NHI attacks we're seeing. I think at our core, fragmentation is a huge issue. And I think if we solve the fragmentation problem, it makes all the rest of those challenges that we're seeing less of challenges and more just how we enable them to accelerate our organizations. So that fragmentation, let's start with like IAM, IGA, and PAM. So first, access management is, getting folks access. Governance is sort of ensuring the right users have the right level of access at the right time and only the right resources at the right time. And then PAM is sort of securing the crown jewels, right? Making sure that the digital crown jewels are secure. Those historically were very interrelated platforms. And what we've been advocating for this for a while, this concept of an identity security fabric, right? And this is what we've been building towards. And the way that we think about an identity security fabric is sort of in three parts. The first is a set of products that secure identity end to end. So before, during, and after auth. And I can explain what that means. The second one is the thing that makes these individually excellent products collectively spectacular. That is an orchestration layer that helps stitch those together and creates end-to-end user enablement and security journeys. And then the third, part 3 of 3, is what we'll call secure identity integrations. Fundamentally, identity is pointless without being integrated into every single tool that exists in an IT organization, and there's so much diversity in every single organization. So secure identity products, secure identity orchestration, and then deep integrations. And I'm happy to share more about how those things come together. But I think that's sort of getting that end-to-end identity security fabric is key.
Yeah, I completely agree. Relates to this point because I do think if it feels like we've had this large fragmentation across IAM, IGA, PAM originally, and I just feel like leaders, practitioners whom I've been watching is I feel like we need to have that identity fabric, to your point, of end-to-end orchestration, deep level of integrations before we then layer on all of the, because by the time AI agents and AI expands that surface, it's going to be significantly a mess if we haven't already figured out. And I think there are emerging areas like even ISPM we hear about that helps with the discovery at least, and then that eventual creation of that identity fragmentation. Julia, is there anything that you wanted to add to that as well, or even another point that you wanted to touch on?
Well, I'd love to unpack a little bit further kind of Jack's point on this, not only the fragmentation, but also the pre, during, and post auth. Like the during phase is also very interesting when we come. And what I mean by that is as we think about like the evolution of an converged identity platform for the market, and what does it mean to have governance and PAM and other kind of identity security capabilities in one place, we have to talk about extensibility. And during auth, what is very interesting is that many companies have to be able to customize that. And so having an extensible platform that has tools that developers within large enterprises, developers within GSIs, developers within startups, developers are in all organizations, have to be able to take those tools that are built on API first principles, that are built on a common object model, a common data layer, to be able to take those and build custom capabilities for their organizations. And the reason why that matters is because in large enterprise companies, the Fortune 100, the Fortune 500, the Global 2000, large public companies, particularly in regulated industries, their business processes are driven by compliance. So to make that concrete, if you take like a manufacturing organization or an entertainment organization, think like a theme park or organizations, companies where you don't have deskless workers, there are like labor union requirements, there are corporate policy requirements. And so those need to be tailored to their businesses. Think also like a hospital, highly regulated industry. They have to meet certain requirements from a data security standpoint, from an authorization, identity verification standpoint. And so there's a whole myriad of customized identity security use cases in order to validate who is logging in is the right person who needs the right access to the right data and the right systems and has the right level of privileges. And that's where that customization piece and the extensibility and the ability to design and orchestrate policies in a secure way is increasingly critical. And that's where we see the future.
I think can I build on that with just a concrete example here as well? And I think we sort of touched on it a little bit, this concept of securing identity before, during, and after authentication, and each one of those having extensibility touch points, right? The moment of auth, as Julie was saying, we might want to bring in device signal. We might want to bring in network signal at the moment of auth. We might want to bring in identity verification. We might want to bring hardware verification in, right? Whether it's a deskless worker scanning a badge, or there's a security, like a YubiKey that is going to be exercised. So like there's extensibility at the moment of auth, but then before a user ever authenticates, we've got identity security posture management, right? Assessing the security posture and discovering latent risks that might exist, like MFA bypass scenarios where users have direct access without MFA to downstream apps, right? Identity governance, making sure that the right users have the right access driven by policy, as Julia was saying, before that user ever gets to a login box, right? And then after auth, right? So then you've got the moment of auth, you've got all that rich signal. It's the most secure moment in that life cycle. And then session security degrades over time naturally because those tokens are out in the wild, right? They are, just by the very fact that they've been minted, that means that there's more time out there for someone, a threat actor, to collect them and try to, take over the session. And so how do you maintain that session security across a web of technological tooling, right? Because Francis could have, had his session hijacked not only, at the IDP layer, at the identity provider, but also your Slack session could have been hijacked. And so what's a threat actor going to do when they get access to your Slack session? Well, they're going to move laterally from app to app to app and start signing into other applications. So, insider social engineering and all these things. So, and so that post identity or post auth threat detection is also critical to have deeply integrated across the tech ecosystem so that we can orchestrate detection, and remediation.
Absolutely. And I do think those are all great points, Jack and Julia. And I think AI ideally helps us enable a lot of this. I think eventually, in this post-auth world where things are moving, I believe, I have this big belief that a big part of post-auth is detecting anomalous behavior or being able to predict risky patterns as a result. So, hey, a token has been hijacked or someone's using a session. How do we go about detecting? And I do believe AI we already have some of those controls today, but I also see AI really enhancing this, or even AI in some of my research work that I do already. We're already seeing how AI is helping to build connectors faster, to be able to enable a lot of this extensibility to some of the points that you all mentioned. So there is this move away from the static world, defragmented world, towards more of this dynamic world that we're moving into. And I do think AI will be a catalyst. So building upon this platform extensibility and how we integrate solutions, I feel this leads to a natural extension of platforms versus best of breed, right? I mean, you might want to easily, I think some people might make the easy argument of like, oh, well, just going all in on a platform to have all of this. But sometimes too, there's that question among every CIO, do we go into an all-in-one platform? Or, for example, with AI and AI agents, a lot of these are emerging risks, new problems that we need to tackle. And sometimes CISOs feel like they might be better off with a best of breed solution. So maybe, Julia, I'll start off with you here. In this typical debate, if we have a CISO or practitioner who's listening to this and wondering how should they approach solving these problems, how would you advise them based off what you hear from customers and all the work that you do?
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for having an open, neutral, and composable platform, because it is also a function of the complexity of every organization's IT ecosystem, right? There are many organizations who tend to be smaller or more homogeneous, have more homogeneous IT organizations for whom, a one-stop shop may make sense. But for those for whom, security is absolutely mission critical, they're in regulated industries, they have large complex footprints all over the world, part of a larger complex third-party ecosystem with suppliers and so forth. Having that composable identity that is a platform that is able to interoperate across a whole range of cloud native, SaaS, on-prem, multi-cloud types of environments is actually a huge security enabler because it enables more agility. And so I would argue that in order to be able to accomplish that, there has to be that shared understanding across all these integrations that's based on standards. And a perfect example of that is like, if you look at like the NIST CSF 2.0 framework, the different tiers of identity maturity, it is those organizations for whom that security posture is absolutely critical that are actively pushing and very, very focused on achieving the highest tiers in accordance to industry best practices and standards.
I'll double down on that and maybe make a really pointed statement. I believe that identity should be thought of as a primary cloud. Now, what I mean by that is, when you think about the clouds that you deploy in, your organization, right? You might have a productivity cloud. You might have a cloud service. You might have like a cloud service provider, right? A hyperscaler. We believe that identity, and not just identity, an independent and neutral identity provider needs to be in that stack. And the reason is because there's diversity in every single tech stack. To what Julia was saying, it's not just, you think about the journey of an organization from startup to megacorp, right? You've got a small company, you're maybe all on, maybe you're all at Google, you're all on, Microsoft, you've got everything. And then you start building custom applications, and you need to be giving access and securing access to custom internal applications. Or maybe as you grow, you acquire a company or you get acquired. And then there are multiple IDPs that you need to work with. Then you've got, maybe you're acquired by a legacy company, and there's, Active Directory floating around. There's Entra, there's Okta, there's multiple IDPs floating around. How do you maintain session security in that sort of environment, right? Then you have users coming in with different types of devices, right? You might have, some that are domain joined, some that are not, some that, you've got contractors, temp workers that are bringing the, I'm sitting here, with my own device. I work for Okta and I have a BYOD scenario working for Okta. Okta has to maintain session security on my personal device when I'm accessing corporate resources. How do we do that, right? And so you need an independent and neutral identity provider that understands that there's diversity in every tech stack and can sort of keep those sessions secure regardless of where they happen to exist. And I think that there's a really interesting incentives discussion when you think about, sort of outsourcing your identity stack to, an organization that might be, the platform of all platforms, right? Buy one license and we'll be the entire, we'll power the entire organization. But the reality is there's always going to be a little bit of diversity there. And their incentive is going to be to say, well, you stay in our ecosystem, we're going to keep you safe. You go outside of our ecosystem, it's scary, right? And it's sort of at your own peril. But the reality is there is that diversity everywhere, right? And so that's why Okta, we are huge champions of open standards like the shared signals framework, global token revocation or universal logout, IPSI, the interoperability profile for secure identity enterprise. We're obviously huge fans and supporters of the FIDO Alliance. So like working in those open standards based frameworks that surround identity security. Just because we're independent and neutral doesn't mean we have to be pacifists in the fight against identity related security threats. But yeah, so we believe that independent neutral identity should be a primary cloud.
I love it. I love that. And I don't think a lot of people do talk about that. And I love that cloud concept, applying that, but also thinking about that in within the concept of identity. And I think just synthesizing both of your key points here. And I do think this should be the right approach into platforms as opposed to thinking of it as a walled garden. Let's think more about open standards, operability, obviously, and composability. And I do think as the enterprise stack gets more complex, and I do think with AI and AI agents significantly changing what this looks like, I do think this will be increasingly important. And so this is a very, very helpful context, and I hope leaders take a balance, at least a mix of this hybrid philosophy as we think about platforms. So maybe let's just, as we kind of like think about the wrap up of our conversation, as we think about the next 3 to 5 years, we have our audience could be investors, could be CISOs, founders, and probably different identity enthusiasts who might be curious about what should they be thinking about over the next couple of years as maybe they're doing roadmap in the organization. So maybe Jack, I'll start with you. What are some really big important trends that you think everyone should be on the lookout for?
I'd say there are probably two things that are really, really important to keep in mind. One, the first, and I think is very, very tactical, very near term, and it's happening already, is the convergence between IAM, IGA, and PAM, right? And that's something that not only yourself, but other analysts have been calling out. And so I think that, understanding how those identity security fabrics are going to keep your organization secure, I think that is no regrets, something that every CISO should be thinking about. I think the second one, obviously, is the rise of agentic AI. And so with the rise of agentic AI, you've got this sort of like historical NHI approach. There's going to be a service account. It's going to be given super admin access. That's its own class of challenges, right? That you need to discover and secure those. And that's top of mind for every single CISO that I speak with. Then there's this sort of like platform agentic AI, where you have, let's call it like corporate IT built or one-off tools that give you, enterprise search capabilities, enterprise operator capabilities. I think that's sort of what we're working on now, is making sure that we give visibility to the authorizations that are given to those types of tools back to IT. So IT and security teams can gain visibility and control over those authorizations. And I think the next frontier on the AI agent front will be like, you as a custodian. So I don't know, I'm making up a word here, but like Francis is the custodian of a small army of agents. And you are going to be spinning up agents. So like, in the IO announcement yesterday, there was agent mode. And I can see a world where there are multiple agent modes going on. So Francis, you could spin up one agent, one platform over here, or one agent that's orchestrating across a variety of MCP servers, like accomplishing an outcome over here, spinning up another agent that's, creating marketing assets over here, another agent over here that's publishing website updates, that's another one that's writing a blog post. And those can just be a centralized agentic platform, and how you manage authorization and security tracking across those sort of multi-hop agentic platforms. I think that'll be the next frontier. And it's when you think about the productivity gains, they're going to be massive. And so but also the security risks inherent, those are going to be pretty big. And so we're building a lot of foundational capabilities to secure the AI agent workforce.
Yeah, I mean, how do you, one maybe last thing is just how we balance this relative to the human problem too, like it feels like this is going to be a huge world of its own. Maybe very briefly, how do you think about how we then balance it with all the human problems that we already have in the traditional three areas that you talked about?
The human problems, meaning
The IGA PAM, exactly, your typical.
I think so. I'll make one look. You could simplify it and say AI. They're AI agents. They're just like you and me. They're just not carbon based. You could, something like that. In which case, if or let's go back to that, Francis is spinning up a bunch of agents, and you, Francis, are the custodian of those agents. You might say, hey, look, build me a blog post, that I'm going to publish, but you don't have permission to publish, right? And so you obviously, Francis, have permission to publish, but the agent doesn't. So how do you empower that agent with a subset of your authorization? And then going through what might feel like a standard governance, access request flow, that agent could then request access to Francis for time bound. Hey, Francis, here's the blog post that I want to publish access to your blogging platform, right? And that's an IGA flow. That's a run-of-the-mill standard IGA flow that's been around for a decade and change, right? 2 decades. And so that's why I think there are a lot of parallels here. There are obviously some new capabilities that need to be built, but things like lifecycle management, observability, all this vaulting, rotation, all of those things, those are capabilities that are going to be needed to power the agentic AI future.
I agree, completely agree. Julia, what would you add to this as we think about the future?
Well, 2 points. One is just to dovetail on Jack's point is that as AI continues to proliferate and as you have more and more AI agents being bundled together to do complex tasks. Case in point, there was a great Forbes article about Manus AI, you may know, coming out of China, and the resume story of where autonomous agents are now able to do very complex things that a human would do, but without guardrails. And that is like, okay, the threat actors are also using that technology. And my point being that this platform thread that we're talking about here is so increasingly important because the development of external builders versus threat actors, that cycle is just getting faster and faster and faster. And so that's where the platform piece becomes really strategically important because it enables greater accessibility, greater flexibility, greater customization for organizations at scale, and to be able to ingest inbound those security signals, make sense of them as part of this platform play, and do more security and access and authorization orchestration. And that's where we're starting to see that this macro shift is going to be increasingly towards security as a service layer, where identity platforms are really going to serve as policy engines across multi-cloud, SaaS, and on-prem, and have that ability to abstract complexity while also maintaining greater visibility and control as the threat landscape becomes more and more complex.
Yeah, no shortage of problems and challenges for a lot of our security leaders, operators to actually think about in the future. But I think on one hand, it's exciting. It's an exciting future that we're moving into, as I think, as all of us users of AI in our personal lives. And I also think in the cybersecurity world, I think we're moving into a new world that's it's just going to be huge. It's going to be lots of challenges, but I think there are going to be lots of interesting solutions. I think AI and AI agents are going to be both a challenge, but also a huge enhancer for security operation of operators largely. So with that, I would really like to thank Jack and Julia. I mean, I feel like we could still have gone on and on. There's so much to uncover, but and who knows, maybe there's a future part too there somewhere where we go deep into some of this concept. But I would just want to say thank you once again to you, Julia and Jack, for joining us today. Really, really grateful for your time. Thanks for all the different insights that we've shared in and around platform versus best of breed and some of the solutions that I think practical solutions our leaders could take out of this conversation. So maybe to wrap things up, Julia, Jack, where could people find you after this?
Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I was going to say the exact same thing. Jack Hirsch on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Francis, thanks so much for having us. It's great.
Always a
Absolutely.
pleasure to speak with you, Francis, and welcome
Thank you,
any future opportunity to do so.
Absolutely. Really exciting conversation. Thank you all. And if you've enjoyed this episode today, definitely give us a follow on social media across software analyst platforms. So until next time, stay curious and stay secure.